Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
Huge shout out to Chris for solo streaming the trade deadline and giving his raw reactions in real time. I couldn't be there. I had some other obligations, unfortunately, but huge round of applause for him because it's not easy. So yeah, shout out to you, bro. And we do appreciate all the support. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so the NBA trade deadline has officially come and gone, and we're here to talk about what a wild. I mean, it wasn't even really the deadline day; it was deadline week, basically. I mean, going all the way back to Saturday, of course. Going all the way back to the Luka AD trade, of course. If you want to look at our thoughts on those, you can go back and look at our previous episode. Also included in that was the De'Aaron Fox trade to the Spurs, so we don't really have to really get too much into those. But instead, we can focus more so on these trades, right, that kind of went down in the last couple of days, right? So most of it took place on Wednesday, right? But like Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday morning, Wednesday night, into like early Thursday morning, right? There weren't as many big trades. There were a few. We can talk about them, but we'll start with the Wednesday ones, right? So we had a few. The biggest one I think on that day was the Jimmy Butler deal, right? So obviously he was finally moved. He was moved to the Golden State Warriors in a just absolutely gigantic hot team deal where basically almost anyone and everyone that could get moved basically was in this deal, right? But the basics essentially is Jimmy Butler goes to the Golden State Warriors. It was Andrew Wiggins and then Kyle Anderson, to the Miami Heat, along, I believe, with a first-round pick, right? Some type of pick compensation. And then you also had the Utah Jazz and the Detroit Pistons, who were also in this deal as well, right? And you got Dennis Schroeder, who went to the Jazz, and then he was rerouted to the Detroit Pistons. You had, like, Josh Richardson, who was on the Miami Heat. He goes to the Pistons, or, excuse me, the Jazz, or whatever. And then you had Lindy Waters III go from Golden State to the Detroit Pistons as well. So basically, like, anyone and everyone was getting moved. And this was kind of, a possible framework for a Jimmy Butler type deal. When you look at it from the perspective of both teams, also, to be fair, Jimmy Butler also signed a 2-year massive extension, right? So basically $127 million extension. So essentially like 60 plus million a year. So it's a lot of money, right? For 35, 36, 37-year-old Jimmy Butler. He opted out of his player option and basically signed a new deal.
Yep.
So when we look at it from those teams' perspectives, I mean, for Miami, you got out of the Jimmy Butler business. He forced his way out. And you got back a package that not the most ideal, like not the perfect scenario, but at the very least you did get back Andrew Wiggins, right, who's been playing very well for the Warriors this year, right, basically giving them, really good production that's, maybe not quite the all-star level, the title year, but he's been good, right? I think he's been much better than he was last year, where you kind of wondered what's going on, what happened to his game. You also got back Kyle Anderson, right? Also from the Golden State Warriors. He was supposed to move to Toronto, but I think they just
held
ended
on
up
to him, right?
Yeah, they held on to him. Instead, the Heat also got back Davion Mitchell from Toronto, right, which was also in that deal. I think these were all kind of roped in together. So you got Davion Mitchell, you got Kyle Anderson, you got PJ Tucker, who they moved as well, right? They moved him to another I think they moved him to the Raptors as well. So there was a lot of puzzle pieces that were kind of in this trade, and I think it just recently finalized not too long before we got on, because even though the trade deadline was at 3, it wasn't actually, the trade wasn't quite through yet, right? Because they still had a bunch of other stuff that they had to work out. But basically, when you look at it from all of those perspectives, for Miami, you got rid of a guy that didn't want to be there for some guys that are solid players, right? And they're guys that could help you on defense. It gives you more depth, right? So at the very least, you can say if you're the Heat, you have multiple guys that you can put out there at different points, even with defense, right? Because they didn't have as many defense first oriented guys on the team outside of, some of these players, like a Bam, and some others. But, you got back a decent amount from that perspective. And then from the Warriors perspective, right, you got Jimmy Butler, you got a guy, right, because they were looking to kind of trade for some type of co-star, right? Because we know the day before leading up to that, they were looking at everybody. They were looking around and asking for literally everyone, right? They mentioned Jimmy Butler. They mentioned Kevin Durant, right? Because that had some steam to it for a little bit. They mentioned Paolo Banchero. They mentioned LaMelo Ball, right? Like, I think LeBron was also roped in here as well. So they were looking for
Yeah.
anyone and everyone to try to come to the Warriors, but nobody really seemed like they wanted to go there. Because I know there was reporting about Durant had no intention of going back to Golden State, right? I'm going to assume for relatively obvious reasons, but either
Oh
way,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So either way, if you're the Warriors, you got Jimmy Butler, and I think what is nice about it is you didn't have to give up any of your young guys. So you got to hold on to Kaminga, you got to hold on to Pods, you got to hold on to Trace Jackson Davis and whomever else. And essentially, it's also not a 1 year rental. You got him for the long haul, right? And this year, and then basically 2 more seasons. And now you kind of just have to figure out how to fit these pieces together. Because, offensively, he played in Miami where their system is kind of similar to what the Warriors do. Obviously, it's different because it's different personnel, but, they do run a motion offense. So I don't think there's too many issues there. Of course, the 3-point shooting could be a concern because in the regular season, he just doesn't shoot that well from three, nor does he take that many. The playoffs is kind of more so where his shooting seems to go up. But I think the main concern is, can he play enough games? If you're gonna, are you gonna get? Presumably, you're gonna get a motivated, energized, ticked off version of Butler. So if you can get the best version of that, that's really nice. It's just obviously down the line. Once you get to year 2, year 3, that's where it probably doesn't look as good. How much does he decline? Right? How good is he gonna be at that point? How good is Stephen Draymond gonna be at that point? Right? So I think there's kind of some questions and concerns there. But I think just from a talent perspective, like, Jimmy Butler is a better player than Wiggins. It's just a matter of, again, are you going to get that version of Jimmy Butler that we saw a couple years ago in the playoffs? We don't know, right? Because to be honest, even before this Heat stuff fell apart, he wasn't playing that consistently well, right? It looked like, that there definitely was some slippage. Now, how much of that was him still not really happy about getting the new deal? I don't know, right? So that's kind of the question that I have where how good is he at this point? If you get the really good version, then this is really good because at the very least it gives you a playoff push and it gives you a chance to, possibly make some noise in the playoffs. You wouldn't necessarily pick them to win the title or come out of the West, but it's better than standing pat. It's better than doing nothing and just if they didn't do nothing or if they didn't do anything, probably would have just missed the playoffs, honestly. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they may have just not even made the play in at that point. So at the very least, you got another guy. You did move a lot of pieces out, and they didn't make a secondary trade because I was hoping that they would make the Vucevic deal, but they ended up not doing that. So you're still kind of stuck with the bigs you have. So it's not an ideal situation. So that's kind of the part where you're feeling a little bit down. But at the very least, from Golden State, you got a star, and you didn't have to give up any of your young guys. And then for the Heat, you got off of that guy, and you brought in some players that at least gives you some flexibility down the road, and you're not going to hopefully completely fall apart post Jimmy trade because I mean he's been gone for most of this recent stretch anyways, and they've kind of been hanging around here and there. But at the very least, now I think the drama's gone. And so those guys can kind of just focus on the rest of the season. You got some great production from Khalil Ware as of late. He's been starting next to Bam. Now you've gotten a better version of Bam. Tyler Hero's an all-star. So now this rotation, I think, just makes more sense as opposed to having like a $48 million gaping hole in it. So I think, both sides ended up coming out pretty well. Because I think, from the Miami perspective, you didn't get the best deal, because if you had done this in last summer, you probably could have gotten a better deal. But you at least got back something, right? You got back Wiggins, you got back Davion Mitchell, you got back, Kyle Anderson, pieces that at least can probably help you win some games right now and not completely fall off, which is what they were looking to probably do anyways. I don't think they're really ready to go into the tank mode, not with, some of the pieces that they have. So I think they came out well, and I think the Warriors did fine.
Yeah, I somewhat agree. I think I'm not super high on the Warriors aspect because of the desperation factor.
Right.
I
It
know,
is a
I know,
desperate.
yeah, I know. Like some good things do come out of desperation, but I don't know. I'm just not feeling the long term effects of this one. Like you said, I agree. Like it'll definitely put them in that play in spot for sure because I think they do get better, production from Jimmy Butler than you do Andrew Wiggins, especially, when it comes to clutch time moments and stuff like that. And we all know what kind of player Jimmy Butler is when he has a chip on his shoulder. I think that's cool, good narrative and stuff like that. But I think the true winner of the trade is Miami Heat. I think it only makes sense because look at the haul that they got. And initially, I liked the first version of the haul, but obviously things had to be
Mhm.
moved to make it make more sense for the league
Right.
in general. But I think bringing in Andrew Wiggins is an automatic W. You get a wing that can, not necessarily be Jimmy Butler, but replicate it a little bit. You have some defense, and you definitely have some offense there as well. And I think it's a perfect complement to what kind of roster they're really trying to build going forward post Jimmy Butler era. I think, you're looking for two-way guys who can actually do something with the ball. And I think that's helpful because it'll mask, Tyler Hero's defense, but also complement Bam's defense as well. You don't have to have Bam come out on the perimeter as much, when a guy like Andrew Wiggins is on your team. Complement
Mhm.
that with Davion Mitchell as well. They needed another point guard on that team, which is why I was kind of confused when, Schroeder got rerouted. But, regardless, I think Davion Mitchell is just as serviceable as a backup guy. The offense is kind of there, but the defense for sure and the effort level will definitely help them in the long run, I think. And then, like you said, Kyle Anderson, he can kind of slot in there as well. And I think they also have the first round pick or whatever. So I think they're the
Mhm.
clear winner. So, I like it for, their future. And I like it for the current time because, like you said, they are kind of making a push in the standings a little bit. What right now, yeah, they're 25 and 24, so they're playing, a little bit around 500 basketball. But I think now you're getting another level of production that you weren't getting from Jimmy Butler because he wasn't playing, obviously. So
Right.
just adding in a guy like Wiggins, I think, will help the roster in general. And
Yeah.
maybe you can, get up to the fifth seed or something like that.
Yeah, not necessarily a contender, but again, you got back a piece that can help you win right now, and who knows, you could always flip him, or you could just keep him, because
Yeah.
again, he's been good for the Warriors this year, and obviously it's a different group of players, but just with the way he's been playing, he's not really playing like the Wiggins from, the previous, his initial early stints, right? He's
Right.
been playing more within, the team concept, right? Where now he just kind of does what you need him to do. You need him to defend, you need him to rebound, you need him to hit open shots, attack closeouts, maybe post guys up. He can pretty much do all of that for you. So I think that's a really good deal. The
Yep.
question I have for the Warriors mainly is for this playoff race. If you look at the standings right now, and obviously we can also mention some of these other teams, but with the standings right now, they are 11th. Obviously that can change because, to be honest, you have a three-way tie between 9 and 11. But you look at the top six, right? How does that look, right? Because you have OKC at 1, you got Memphis at 2, you got the Rockets at 3, and the Nuggets are right there at 4. They're half a game behind, so we'll see if they possibly catch them because the Rockets have been struggling recently, right? They're 5-5 in their last 10, lost 4 in a row, a bunch of just boneheaded plays at the end of games, including just an awful stretch against the Nets where they give up a three, turn the ball over on the inbounds, and then give the ball to D'Angelo Russell, who basically hits the go-ahead three. So that's pretty bad
Hmm.
if you're the Rockets. Just from you can't lose a game like that, where you just gave the game away. Then the Lakers, who are 8-2 in their last 10 games and made a couple moves that we haven't mentioned yet, they've won 3 in a row. And like I said, 8-2 in their last 10, they're fifth. And then you have basically 6-11, three losses apart from one another, right? So that's where things get kind of interesting because the Clippers have been playing well. Now they're 500 in their last 10. Can they hang on, or are they going to kind of just start to drop? The Wolves, right now, are starting to play relatively okay, right? 6-4. They do have some injuries that they have to deal with. DiVincenzo's out, Randall's out for at least a couple of weeks. Then the Mavs, right, have completely changed their roster. They lost to the Sixers. They're blowing out the Celtics as we speak. So we'll
Yep.
see what they look like, as they kind of, figure some stuff out. But then you look at the Kings, they made their Levine trade. We'll see what they do. And then the Suns didn't really do much of anything, although they did move Nurkic. We'll get into that. So that's kind of the question I have for the Warriors is, you know, can they leapfrog some of these other teams? I mean, like, they could probably leapfrog Sacramento. They could probably leapfrog Phoenix, depending on, the health of some of these guys.
Can I have
And
a
then
hot
the
take real
Mavs,
quick?
go ahead.
I think the Spurs leapfrog the Warriors
Okay.
just because of the
And
De'Aaron Fox thing. I don't know.
yeah, and the thing with the Spurs is for them, they are 2.5 games behind. There are 2 games behind Golden State, so they're going to have to catch up. They do have, at least right now, have the tiebreaker, and they will
Hmm.
play them a couple more times. So those could possibly be some big matchups
Yeah.
down the line. So they're 3-7 in their last 10, but they have a chance, right, to be able to get back. The Blazers went 9-1 in their last
Yeah,
10,
that's
but
nuts.
yeah, but either way, that's kind of where I'm curious to see, because ideally you got to get out of the play-in. Or best case scenario, you at least got to get to the 7-8 spot. If you can
Agreed.
get there, then I think at the very least you have a decent shot at, getting into the playoffs. And then, you're either playing OKC or you're playing whoever the 2 seed is. Might be Memphis, we don't know. But, we'll see what those teams look like come playoff time. But I wouldn't necessarily expect an upset, you know what I mean? But at the very least, it's a better situation than you were in before. It's just, again, what version of Butler are we going to get? If we can get a good version, right, then that changes everything. And I think that's the hope, that you're going to get, a better version of Butler than what we saw, even before he kind of started his stretch where he just kind of just quit on the team.
Yeah,
So
Warriors need a shake up.
Right. So then we kind of move on to some of these other deals, right? And so after that one, you had Lonzo Ball sign a 2-year, $20 million extension.
Good.
Didn't really expect it, but I guess that's great for Lonzo Ball because, obviously he fought back from his injuries and he's able to stick around. We'll see. Now he makes less per year after this year. So at the very least, he could be a more movable contract, or they could keep him, because I guess they don't have enough point guards. But either way, congrats to Lonzo Ball for that one. But we don't have to spend too much time unless you want to just share what you think.
I mean, like you said, great for him, great for the story, great for the comeback and stuff like that. But yeah, for sure, unexpected. I thought he was going to be moved, honestly, but it's a W.
Yeah, and then moving on, Kyle Kuzma from the Washington Wizards. When we didn't think he was going to get moved, he actually got traded. He was able to get traded to the Milwaukee Bucks. This was a 3-team deal, right? So you had Kyle Kuzma from the Bucks go to the from the Wizards, go to the Bucks for Chris Middleton, right? Then also, I believe they were able to grab, what was it?
AJ Johnson.
AJ Johnson, the first round pick from the Milwaukee Bucks, so he goes there. And then also DeLon Wright from the Bucks goes to the Knicks, and then Jericho Sims was also part of the deal. He was on the Knicks, and he's going to the Milwaukee Bucks. So he's going there with Kuzma. Then DeLon Wright goes to the Knicks, and then Chris Middleton goes to the Wizards along with AJ Johnson. So this one I was very surprised by because I didn't expect it at all. I know that the Bucks were reportedly very active in terms of looking for deals. But my thought process was, maybe they do something small to get under that second apron, and then they go out and do something big. But Levine was already out because he was a king. Butler, it sounded like he wasn't going there. Most people thought Golden State by the time it felt like he wasn't going to Phoenix. And then, who else was left? So then I guess you just pick Kyle Kuzma. And, again, as a Wizards fan, obviously, his game, he's not had a great season this year, right? This is probably the worst season of his career.
Agreed.
Yeah. And how much of that is on a very bad team versus like he's just not really that good? I don't know. I mean, again, I think there's a fair argument to be made that I think you could get a better version of him on the Bucks on a winning team, right? And maybe can you get him playing back to some of the stuff he was doing when he was a Laker, right? The title year, where he was kind of contributing on both ends of the floor, playing a role, getting you some rebounds, playing some defense, knocking down timely shots. Can he do all of that for the Milwaukee Bucks? Maybe. I mean, it's just a matter of, again, you're taking a guy that was just not playing very well and putting him on another team. But it's also a clear sign that we kind of thought that they don't trust Chris Middleton to really be able to get right, by the time the playoffs roll around. And they wanted to get out of the second apron. So I think the hope is, can he be better than Chris Middleton? Because this season he's been giving you 13, 4-4, 50-40 from the field and from three. So it's not like he's shooting poorly. He just has some games where, like, he just hasn't given you great production. The last couple of games he played, honestly, he was relatively fine. But he also had a couple of games mixed in there where he didn't score at all. So that's kind of the problem, where a guy making that much money, you can't have that up and down level of production. So I'm kind of mixed on it. I'm hopeful for Kuzma's sake that he can give them some quality production. He's a different player from Middleton because he's I think more of a 4 than he is a wing. Not that he can't, do some wing stuff, like, he can give you some shot creation, some, playmaking and things like that. But, I feel like the Middleton fit when he's right is just better than the Kuzma fit, but he just wasn't giving you that level of production. And then, from a Knicks perspective, we'll see what DeLon Wright gives them. It's another guard. So, on a team that already, most of their bench is primarily guards at this point, other than Achua. So we'll see if he even really plays. But and then Jericho Sims to the Bucks. Does he play at all? I mean, they don't really have any other true centers outside of Brook Lopez, but maybe we get more Giannis at center minutes with Kuzma. Bobby Portis, could he and Jericho Sims play together? I don't know. But kind of a weird one, but it feels mainly like a cost-cutting move for the Bucks and a hope that you're buying low on a guy that just a couple seasons ago was playing relatively well for a bad team. And it seemed like Kuzma was kind of in the mode where, based on some of the quotes, he was basically done with the Wizards.
He was checked out. The expiration date was definitely reached and long expired for sure. I think I like this move for both teams. Starting with the Bucks, like you said, you get a solid wing. I think, like you said, if he can replicate what he did in his final 2 LA seasons, maybe a little bit of a combination of his first 2 seasons as a Wizard, because I think one aspect of his game that I did like from the last couple of seasons was his passing. I think it had gotten better. I think the playmaking was kind of something that wasn't really there. It seemed like he was more of a black hole on offense at times. But, if he can give you defense, pass the ball, and also be a viable option on offense, I think that's a good thing. But yeah, his efficiency this season has been horrible. Like if you watch Wizards games, like I know the 2 Wizards fans that exist are like, yeah, this is bad, because I'm telling you, the efficiency is so in the gutter. And I don't know what explains it. I know he's been dealing with health, stuff the whole time, but
Yeah,
I feel like really, I think it was more of a mental thing. Like, I'm checked out. I don't even want to be here anymore, so I'm not even gonna
right,
try. So I think you're gonna
right.
see, not a rejuvenated version or like a crazy version of Kuzma, but maybe more of a serious version. Think of like PJ Washington for, the Dallas Mavericks last year. I think we're going to see
Yeah,
him have a very integral role in a potential Bucks post deadline, win streak or something like that. I think you're going to see him be integrated into the offense, also be relied on, not heavily on the defensive end, but more than Middleton. And also, I think he can provide you a little bit more, um, I guess, energy, because I feel like the thing with Middleton is it looks like he's lost a step. Like you said, the efficiency is solid, but just the numbers and the volume, I'm not a huge fan of, considering that in order for that team to really contend realistically, you probably need Chris Middleton to go back to his title year
mhm.
version, and I don't think you're going to get that. I don't think we're ever going to get that again. So I do like that from the Bucks perspective. From the Wizards perspective, I mean, you got rid of the, not going to call him a cancer, but it's pretty much a cancer. You just got rid of the toxicity. You're bringing in a guy who I think is more serious, probably more willing to be, that solid veteran for, your other wings on the roster. I don't think he's going to take away a bunch of shots from everybody else, because if you haven't noticed, since Kuzma's been moved, some guys have had some career games like Bilal Coulibaly. He just posted a triple double and a career high of 11 assists. So things are on the up and up, I think, for the young guys. But overall, you can't be mad at it. And you take a flyer on AJ Johnson, who I think has some intangible potentials. I think there's a lot of promise, in the long run. He's definitely a project player. Never understood why the Bucks really picked him, because he was a project. They didn't need a project. They needed a win now rookie, but hey, it is what it is. I'll take a project anytime, any day.
Right. Yeah, so we'll see, what that looks like. And then moving on, he had a couple of tiny moves, right? Like Jaden Springer going to the Rockets, right? And I think he got waived, so that one we don't really have to talk too much about that 2030 second round pick to the Rockets. So a relatively small one there. Um, you had the Sixers, right, with KJ Martin, right? He's going to, I think he was moved to the Detroit Pistons. And then this was also coupled with Caleb Martin from the Sixers going to Dallas, and then Quentin Grimes going to the Sixers. This one was kind of interesting. My guess is Quentin Grimes, he probably gets re-signed in Philadelphia, right? And then Martin was already on a long-term deal, but supposedly Martin may not be playing for a minute because he still has a hip injury, and the Sixers had to add another second, in order to get that done. So that one's kind of a weird head scratcher one where I'm kind of curious as to what's going on there. Obviously, again with the Mavs, their team looks very different, right, from what it did before. And obviously, like if he can play and he can be healthy, he could help him out. But for now, we'll just have to kind of wait and see on that one.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. This move was weird to me.
Right.
I think I preferred Quentin Grimes in Dallas. I think he was actually very productive as a wing on both ends of the floor. But, I guess Caleb Martin is better, but still, I would prefer Quentin Grimes. I think he was in a groove. He was playing well. But I guess they see, some potential upside that I don't. But I'm not really a fan of this move from Dallas's perspective. I think they've just been really screwing up left and right, to be honest.
I think it's the Max Christie thing. I think by getting him and he's already under contract, and I think they kind of play a similar role. I think that's kind of where they probably
Sure.
felt comfortable because I think they were going to have to pay him, and I guess they're probably like, why should we pay both of them if they play,
Fair
pretty
point.
much the same position. Although I think Christie, is more like a 2-3. Grimes is more like just a straight 2. I mean,
Yeah.
that guy, I guess that could play maybe the 3 in some smaller units.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, and then moving on, Brandon Ingram, Toronto Raptor. Didn't really expect this one at all. I mean, I know there was some reporting about the Raptors were interested. I just didn't actually expect it to happen. But Brandon Ingram was headed to the Toronto Raptors for Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, a first and a second. This one, how do we feel about it? Because from the Raptors' perspective, you get a guy who's a good player, right? And he's been a 20+ point per game scorer. He's been an all-star before. You add him to a group. It's just kind of a bizarre group because it's a very expensive group, and I'm curious to see how much success they're gonna have, right, with that group together, right? You got Quickly, R.J. Barrett, Brandon Ingram, Scotty Barnes, all basically making max money, right, for a team that I don't necessarily know what their ceiling can be in the Eastern Conference, but probably not that high necessarily. Um, I doubt it's a rental because because there's not a lot of teams with cap space, so they're probably gonna sign him to a new deal. This one is just kind of a weird head scratcher for me, where I guess from the Pelicans' perspective, I guess you got back Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk probably to save money. If I had to guess, because there was no way they were going to pay and keep Brandon Ingram. We knew he was going to get moved. I'm just surprised that the Raptors are the team that ended up picking him up.
Agreed.
But I,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Like Toronto was the weirdest destination. When I saw that, I think that happened Wednesday night, right?
yeah, it was Wednesday night.
Yeah, when I saw that when I was about to go to sleep, I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna put this down, my phone down. But yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
weird haul and also a weird destination too. I guess I do kind of like I believe New Orleans got the 2026 first round pick, correct? And a second round pick.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I do like it from that perspective. Like it wasn't, for nothing or, like you said, not just a money saving thing. So you did kind of get, a little bit of value in terms of some draft compensation. But yeah, Toronto, I don't know what Toronto's thinking really. Like I don't really like putting all that money behind a team that might just be mediocre, because you're paying RJ Barrett, you're paying IQ, you're going to have to pay Brandon Ingram, assuming. I just wouldn't put a lot of money and investment into a roster like that. But, I guess New Orleans, you get rid of Brandon Ingram, and I think that was the end goal. So I think they were trying to, by any means necessary, and I think they did that. So.
Right.
I think it
Yeah.
would be C's all around, honestly.
Yeah,
Very
just because
average.
again, like, yeah, because Ingram's a good player. I'm just surprised that the Raptors did it. But I guess for what they had to give up, you didn't really have to give up much. I
Right.
mean, you just kind of give up guys that probably weren't going to be Raptors after the season anyway. So,
Sure.
for the Pelicans, I guess, for a guy that you weren't going to keep, I mean, you got back. I mean, Bruce Brown, I'm assuming he's going to stick with them the rest of the season. They've already said he's not getting bought out. And I
Hmm.
think Olynyk's a 2-year deal anyway. So, possible stretch big to put next to Zion. We'll see.
Yeah.
But like you said, just kind of a weird one. Kind of a random head scratcher, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Also, we had another one that was not long after that. This one was one that completely came out of nowhere because at least the Ingram one did have some reporting earlier in the day that suggested that the Raptors were very likely to land him. But this one had no reporting behind it whatsoever, right? I mean, I know there were people like in the sphere as fans talking about like, oh, the Lakers should go get this guy, right? But nobody expected this to actually happen. And so the Lakers, they were able to grab Charlotte Hornets center Mark Williams for Dalton Connect, Cam Reddish, 2031 unprotected first, and a 2030 pick swap. So this one is one that's kind of interesting from the perspective of we knew the Lakers needed a center. They went out and got a guy that was not really rumored to, really be, I think, in really anything, because that was a guy that the Hornets had drafted. And he's a young guy, 23. And his numbers for the most part, have been somewhere around the realm of a double-double. Basically, this season he's giving you 16 and 10. Not quite as efficient, right? So, what's kind of going on there from the perspective of, is the shot, is the baskets around the rim kind of just not really where it was, right? Because the first 2 years, 64% from the field, basically 59% this year. Also, in terms of the games played, 43 is rookie year, 19 last year, 23 so far this year. So it's a gamble, right? It's a gamble where I think it is probably a little bit of an overpay, but you're getting a guy that you're potentially buying on in the hopes that a guy like Luka can turn that guy into an even better version of himself with LeBron. And I think you're hoping with his size, with his mobility, that if he can continue to figure some of this stuff out, you might potentially have a really quality center on your hands. It's just a matter of, can he continue to develop? Obviously, you did give up Dalton Connect, who you just drafted, and he's been pretty solid as a rookie. And then obviously you're giving up your last tradable first for now, right? Of course, I think they'll have more to trade in the summer. But the first don't matter as much now that you have Luka, right? Because now you're not really in a spot where you're just kind of throwing picks away for a team that is just has really nobody on it of note. So it's a deal where, you could see it in a couple of directions. If it works and it pans out, you might have a franchise center to kind of, not that he's like a, superstar, but just, a guy that you can have on your team as your starting center. And then if it doesn't work, he continues to not really stay healthy. Defensively, is if he can't quite figure some of that stuff out, then you may have overpaid a little bit. But I don't really have too much of an issue with this deal from, the Lakers' perspective. I'm just surprised that the Hornets just kind of just moved him. But I also understand they're getting a bunch of picks back for some other deals that they made. And I guess for them, they're just kind of in a reset mode, I suppose. Just, with guys that I didn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, this was the one that really shocked me initially because I was like, what on earth? But then, you sit on it for a couple hours, maybe even minutes, really, and then you're like, oh, well, this is the first inkling and first move that they're, building around Luca. And I think it's amazing because,
Yep.
you're going to be seeing some very similar things to what Luca did in Dallas. Like, I don't think that the game plan is going to change from his perspective. He still wants that lob threat. And I think Mark Williams can be that guy. He can be a Derek Lively, something similar to that extent. And I think that's awesome because that's what the Lakers need to do. They needed to immediately start, moving guys and being able to build around Luka because I think you need to capitalize now while you need to strike while the iron's hot. And I think it's perfect. Like you said, I'm surprised that Charlotte bit on that because I think Mark Williams was one of the more underrated up and coming prospects in the NBA, and it's like, that's a valuable asset in my opinion. I wouldn't have let him go, but I guess the return was enough for them. And like you said, it's a rebuild within a rebuild, which is crazy to even say. But yeah, this could be arguably one of the best deals outside of the Luka one, obviously. So yeah, the Lakers are freaking winning the trade deadline, man, or they won it. They won it.
Yeah, and like you said, that's a good point where it's the first deal that's now centered around Luca, where it's been kind of reported that they asked him, about like, hey, what type of bigs do you like playing with? And he mentioned, the idea of I play best with like a vertical, with some type of vertical spacing, lob threat type big. And they called for about other guys, right? Like I think they called on guys like Jalen Duren. They called on some guys like Claxton and others, but I think the asking prices were a little bit too high, right? And also it would have required them to move, I think, more of their,
Yeah.
bigger contract
This
type
is a
guys.
good middle ground.
Right. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
he adds to your young core. That's the beautiful part.
Right. Yeah. Because I don't think they were, I think they like most of the guys that they have on the roster. Would they move them for the right deal? Sure. But I don't think they necessarily felt like, do we really want to move, like 2-3 guys to get Nick Claxton? Do we really want to do this right now? And like you said, it's a good middle ground, right? Where it's a guy where if he pans out, and continues to grow in the ways that I think you hope, then like you said, he could be a monster type of guy for them, with his size and his frame. It's the it's the kind of thing where you kind of wonder how were you not able to do this type deal while AD was on the team,
Yeah,
but they
right.
didn't really. Yeah, but they didn't feel like, but I don't think they felt like moving future assets, for, with AD in mind. I guess this kind of the vibe that I think we're getting here.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
like you said, it's a pot, he made, Luca was able to make guys like Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford look really, and that's not to say that they're not good players, but he was able to make them look even better than they actually are, right? And was kind of able to turn them into super effective players, right? In a way where they weren't necessarily quite viewed the same way before we saw them play with him. I mean, people liked Gafford, right, in Washington and
Yeah.
Chicago, right? But then when you saw him in Dallas next to Luca, he was the starting center,
Yeah.
for a team that went to the finals. And then Lively obviously was a guy that I think we liked in the draft, but then he was playing even better than what we thought just based off of his fit. So now I think I don't think he's quite as bouncy as a guy like Lively,
No.
but he can move relatively well for a guy his size.
In
And
the
he's
pick and
got
roll, he's going to be a monster.
yeah, and he's got decent touch too for a big guy. Like it's not just, kind of like run and jump and dunk.
Right.
He's actually a guy that's got a little bit of skill, kind of some of those skill shots around the basket, like, the floaters, and and shots like that. So that's a good tool to have in your back pocket as a big. Even a guy like a Jared Allen has improved, in that tier, and that's kind of why he's, improved as a big, right, compared to
100%.
where he was a few years ago. So again, I think there's a lot of positives to take from that deal if you're a Laker fan. It's just obviously, the question is, can you trust him to be able to play more than half the season? Because so far he hasn't been able to do that except for 1 year. He's had some back and some foot issues. Apparently nothing that required surgery. So that's kind of the gamble there. But if he can be healthy, and they can figure some stuff out, yeah, that's a really good deal, I think, for
Yeah.
LA.
Agreed.
And then you kind of move on, and that pretty much was it for the deals, Wednesday. And then you kind of move into the Thursday deals, right? And that's where, the deals, obviously you're watching this on Friday, but we're recording this on Thursday night. And you had, obviously you had the finalization, of the Butler deal as the other teams were getting roped in there. But you had a few other trades, right? You had DeAndre Hunter, right? He went to the Cleveland Cavaliers, right, for Karis LeVert, Georges Niang, 3 seconds and 2 swaps. Now this is a deal that I think if you're the Cavs, this is pretty solid, right? Because of the fact that you're getting a guy who's a wing, who's had basically a career season, right? He's giving you 19 a game, just under 4 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 46 from the field, 39 from three. I know he's a guy that in general has not been necessarily a favorite of ours because I think by and large, I think the idea of him, he's one of those players where I think the idea of him is better than the actual version of him.
Mm.
But he has had a really good year for them, coming off the bench, still playing a lot. And I think if you can get anything close to what we've seen from him from the Hawks this year for Cleveland, that's a wing that if he can kind of lock in defensively, that's a guy that you can kind of have to hopefully match up against the Tatum or Brown in ways that you didn't have at all, before, where you're kind of banking on Dean Wade, Karis LeVert, Max Strus, and it's just not an ideal wing rotation to have. But at least now you have a guy that fits that mold a little bit better. He's not much of a passer, obviously, right? He's
No.
not a guy that gets you a ton of assists. He looks to get shots up. So I'm curious to see how that looks in the Cleveland offense because their offense has been very much predicated on ball movement, quick rotations, and reads and things like that. But, if the ball ends up in his hands, I mean, he can certainly knock down a shot, attack a closeout. So I think this is, and again, they didn't even have to give up a first. So I mean, I think if you're the Cavs, I think you got to feel pretty good about what you were able to do in terms of you don't usually see a 1 seed make a deal like this, right? And they have one of the best records in the NBA, and they were able to add on to the rotation in a way where you kind of wonder now, could that be the move that worst case scenario can get them to match the Celtics? Maybe we'll see. We'll see if they can actually get over the top. But certainly this makes them better.
Yeah, it caught me off guard, and it's a beautiful move for Cleveland. I think it makes them more consistent, and I know that's kind of crazy considering what their record is. But at the end of the day, look at DeAndre Hunter's stats. He's having a career year. I was on the boat where I was kind of out on him, but he's having a really good career year resurgence, and that's a good thing because I think he's good on both ends of the floor, and that's the beauty in it. Initially, I kind of wanted him to go somewhere like maybe say like Denver, but I think this makes a ton of sense, and hats off to Cleveland for even being able to pull this off because look at what they gave up. Karis LeVert and Georges Niang. I'm taking that 10 times out of 10. DeAndre Hunter is 10 times more consistent than both of those guys. Um, and the pick swaps are there and the second round picks. I mean, second round picks are like pennies at this point. So, you know, shout out to Cleveland for doing this. I think this makes them, at least 2 times better, honestly, because I think if you add him into the rotation, if he's the last guy, in a ball swing rotation, I mean, it not to say that it's guaranteed knockdown, but it's a pretty good shot from the corner or something like
Yeah.
that, or from a wing, or give him a grenade, it might go in. And you've got a lot of guys who can actually hit that kind of shot, so I think it makes them very dangerous.
Yeah. I was a little confused about Atlanta's approach to the deadline in general, just from the perspective of, it seemed like that they were just kind of selling,
Right.
but they don't have their own first. So I don't really quite understand the reasoning behind that. It could just be to save money, get under the tax, possibly. But I don't know. That one was kind of odd, right? Because they also had a couple other trades, right? They moved Cody Zeller to the Rockets just as a salary dump. I think they also gave Houston their second back. But then they also made a trade with the Clippers, right, where they sent Bogdan Bogdanovic to the Clippers for Terrence Mann and Bones Highland, excuse me. And then they also gave the Clippers 3 second-round picks, one of which was the Clippers' own. So he's not had a great season, probably the worst season of his career. Basically 10 points, 37 from the field. Not really good shooting at all, and that's kind of what he's supposed to do. I think the hope is that if he can be healthy and kind of be in a different situation, maybe you can get, a version that's closer to what you were getting in previous seasons, because he's also had some injuries as well. He's not played very much this season. And, a good version of him, that's a heat check guy. That's a guy that can come off the bench and can score in bunches from the perimeter, in ways like that. And, the Clippers off the bench, right, since they've moved Norman Powell into that starting group, they haven't really had that. They kind of tried to have Kevin Porter Jr. be that. They moved him to Milwaukee. But I think if you can get a good version of Bogdanovic, that's probably a better player. It's just he's not played well this season, and he's older. So I think the hope is if you can get a good version of that, then you're solid. And you weren't really giving up anybody of significance because Mann was pretty much out of the Clippers rotation. Like, he just wasn't really playing much this season. He's kind of just fallen out of favor. And Bones Highland fell out of the Clippers rotation like long ago. Like, he wasn't really a part of the rotation when he first got there anyways. So really, if you're the Clippers, if this works, you just got another guy to add to your rotation, and get you some offense, because this team offensively, that's kind of their weakness, right? Defensively, they've been really good, but their offense has been where they've kind of struggled more so because they don't have a lot of great ball handlers. Where you can kind of watch when guys try to trap them and pick them up, they can kind of turn the ball over because they don't have like a lot of super quick, speedy guys, right? Not that Bogdanovich is that, but he's at least a guy that can play off the move.
Yeah, I kind of like it for both sides, if I'm gonna be honest.
Mhm.
You know, if you're Atlanta, you're taking a flyer on Terrence Mann and Bones Highland. I think the funny thing is, I think Atlanta doesn't have enough ball handlers, so bringing in a guy like Bones Highland to come off the bench if he plays at all, I think is pretty good for their situation. But yeah, I think the Clippers did a good job in getting
Mhm.
Bogdanovich because Terrence Mann and Bones Highland weren't really even playing for them, if I'm not
Right.
mistaken. So you
Exactly.
know you're pretty much just getting rid of your own dead weight and bringing in a guy who could potentially not necessarily change the landscape of your roster, but at least give you something because something's better than nothing. And you got a bunch of second rounds, so hats off.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then the Porter Jr. to the Bucks thing for Marshawn Beauchamp. We'll see, if he can give him some scoring off the bench. I don't know. I mean, we'll see if he can really do much because
I
there was
think
like a flurry of small moves right around the end of the deadline where it was teams either kind of just dumping contracts or
yeah,
opening up roster spots, waiving guys.
I think it's a good thing that Milwaukee did move on from their young guys who weren't playing at all, and you do
Mhm.
bring in some guys who probably will be. Like I think
Right.
Kevin Porter Jr. will probably have a better impact on the game than,
Mhm.
Beauchamp or AJ Johnson. So kind of the same
Yeah.
philosophy as previous.
Right. Actually, another deal that we hadn't mentioned that was from the other day, with involving your Wizards, Jonas
Oh,
Valanciunas to the Kings for CD Sissoko and 2 second-round picks. They were also able to, I think, pick up Reggie Jackson, but they got a first for Reggie Jackson, right? And then they also got a first, I think, from the Bucks and that Kuzma,
Yes, we
AJ
did.
Johnson, deal, whatever, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, so what are your thoughts, about moving on from Valanciunas after signing him
I
in the
mean,
offseason?
initially, I was kind of expecting more, but I guess the returns coming in over time that makes up for it. Because initially, the Wizards fans were kind of pissed because we were like,
Right.
"Wow, we just traded Valanciunas to Sacramento. Great move for Sacramento, by the way, because you get a great backup big. Weird. I didn't even know that was on the they were on or he was on their radar at all. I didn't know that was even a thing.
Yeah,
But
there was some reporting about it, but we
okay,
just didn't know.
yeah, so good for them. But Washington, you get back City Sissoko, no longer even on the team. Bunch of second round picks, but then like you said, the first round picks coming in as well. And there's some
Mhm.
other stuff that we do have to talk about. But yeah, I think the fact that they're able to rack up, a few first round picks is good because that's what you need to do. No matter where they are in the draft. They could be late first rounders or early
Mhm.
first rounders. I think as long as you continue to build draft capital, that's good. And I'm glad that we're shilling out some seconds and acquiring them as well because I believe we own the most second round picks in the NBA right now. So good for us
Right.
to kind of hold those cards and just stack up on
Yeah.
pennies.
Yeah. The Bucks also moved Patrick Baldwin Jr. to the Spurs. Just, again, money saving thing. So not really much there. We'll see if the Spurs play him. Probably not, but just kind of just another roster movement. The Phoenix Suns, they did make a move. They traded Yusuf Nurkic and a 2026 first round pick. So that was one of the first that they got from that weird deal where they traded their 2031 first and split it up, which we thought they were going to use it to get Jimmy Butler, but instead they just used it to move Yusuf Nurkic for Cody Martin, Vasilije Micic, and a 2026 second round pick. So yeah, Nurkic is gone. He clearly, I guess, was not vibing with Coach Bud. And, the Hornets got a center when they got rid of both of their centers. So I guess that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
But for the Suns, I wish they could have done more. I wish they could have, excuse me, I wish they could have done more
Agreed.
during this deadline because it just felt like they didn't quite do enough. I mean, they even had the weird stuff about, could you, this, which was the part that confused me, we're going to get Jimmy Butler by trading Kevin Durant. And then, because we can't trade Bradley Beal. And, that just was kind of very bizarre. But, the other day they mentioned that, like, yeah, they're looking at internal development, which basically told me, like, yeah, they're not doing jack to the squad. But they did move Nurkic, who wasn't playing. We'll see if Cody Martin or Micic gives them much of anything. I mean, maybe, but, this is kind of like a rotational half measure type move, right? You're just moving
Yeah.
on from a guy that wasn't there, physically or mentally, and now you're bringing in somebody else who maybe they can help you out a little bit. Maybe like a Cody Martin could take a Kogi's minute since he's not there. We'll see.
I'm so disappointed in the Suns. And it's not that I expected them to do something crazy. I wanted them to do something good. This wasn't good enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think you've chalked your team chemistry. I think the morale
Right.
is so low that
Mm-hmm.
throw the season away. I mean, I think the season was thrown away from the jump just because
Mm-hmm.
of, how piss poor they were playing and the injuries obviously hit them and just everything is not going their way and the lack of a physical screen setting big. Everything was just going wrong and I think it's still going to go wrong. I'm not high on them. I think this is a waste of a season. Beal probably doesn't even he's probably checked out on it. KD is probably checking out on it because he's like, y'all were trying to shop me to Golden State. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's just weird. Weird vibes all around. I don't think I heard anything Booker related, but the fact that, multiple members of the big three were being shopped around and potentially moved around, and then you didn't really do much of anything to get better. I mean, to me, that's an automatic F. So I'm gonna just
Yeah,
be
I mean,
real.
yeah, there was reporting from ESPN, I think Ramona Shelburne, about like that the vibes in there were really negative. Where there's a lot of problems going on in the locker room. Nobody's happy. And I mean, part of that's just frustration because they just haven't been that good since the beginning point of the season. And, winning cures all. Can they win with this group? Think the answer is probably not. I think
No.
we got a decent sample size, to know that right now they're sitting at 10th in the Western Conference, 5-5 in their last 10. They've lost 3 in a row. And it's probably going to take a miracle to be able to get in there because if you're in that 9-10 spot, it's just so difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult because you can't lose a playing game. If you lose even one, you're done. You have to go 2 for 2, and that's just the right to go into the first round against OKC. And I just don't see a
Just to
realistic
get
scenario of
swept.
them. Yeah, I just don't see a realistic scenario of them being able to beat OKC. I think it's a bad matchup for them. So I don't know. This was a team that I think most people thought could realistically challenge for the Western Conference. I know, some people were higher on them than others. Like I wasn't quite as high on them, but I at least thought that they could be like a relatively good contender. I looked at them as a legitimate contender. And they just haven't been this season, really, other than the beginning, 10 games or whatever. Because even last season, they were able to kind of eventually bounce back and win almost 50 games. But by that point, they were still one of the lower seeds. And it's just very difficult to be able to make a deep run on that end of the bracket. It's just too difficult. And it feels like the West might have just kind of passed them by. And I just kind of wonder, what does this lead to in the summer? Will they move on from like a Kevin Durant in the summer? Chris Haynes reported that the Wolves just randomly just kind of made a last ditch effort to say, hey, is KD available? And then, obviously the Suns didn't do that. So maybe they moved some guys in the summer. I don't know. But now they've moved their 2031 first. So, I mean, you don't even, so that first is gone. And like, who cares about these other firsts? Because they're not even really going to be that good. So, I mean, that's kind of the problem, from that team's perspective. But I guess you moved on from Nurkic. So, I guess that's kind of a good thing. But I wish they would have done more, especially
Yes.
given, all the reporting that, sounded like things look pretty bad in there right now.
That's what I'm saying, bro.
Yeah. What do we think about Dennis Schroeder going to Detroit? Because he could have been, one of those buyout guys. Obviously, he's a mid-level exception guy, and I think so he makes a little bit too much to be able to just join any team. But he's going to be headed to Detroit, and I guess play the role of a backup guard.
I mean, I think that's good for Detroit, and I think it's good for him because I think that's the best role suited for him. I don't think he's a starting, caliber point guard unless
Right.
somebody's hurt, to be honest. But and for Detroit, I think it's good because you don't really have a player like that on your roster, in my opinion. I mean, you have
Mhm.
guys who can kind of do that stuff, but I think he's not necessarily one of one, but he's very unique in terms of what
Mhm.
he does bring. There's not a lot of guys in the league like him, so I think he's a solid backup option. I have no problems with it. I just think it's crazy how he was rerouted so many times. What was it, 5 times in a day or
Yeah,
something?
basically. Yeah. So
Ridiculous.
yeah, then we had another surprising one. This was kind of like the last deal of the day, essentially, where the Memphis Grizzlies traded Marcus Smart and a 2025 first round pick to the Washington Wizards. And this was a multi-team deal, right? So the Wizards, they
Woo.
sent Marvin Bagley to the Memphis Grizzlies. They also sent Johnny Davis, right, their former top 10 pick, to the Memphis Grizzlies. And
Got
then
him
I
out of
believe
there.
the Sacramento Kings got Jake LaRavia, right, from the Memphis Grizzlies, right? So they were in that deal as well, or he was in that deal as well. So this one was a little surprising just from the perspective of, I thought that the Grizzlies might look at moving a guy like Marcus Smart in a deal maybe to more so kind of upgrade the rotation. I'm a little bit disappointed that they mainly really only brought back, guys from, the Wizards, and we don't really know how much they can realistically contribute. But from a Wizards perspective, that's pretty good because you got back a first round pick for a guy that I don't think anybody really expected them to trade for him. Can he play? Can he stay healthy? He's barely played the last 2 seasons, so he could just be cooked physically, unfortunately. But, if you're the Wizards, I mean, the fact that you got a first for taking on, I guess, Marcus Smart's contract, that's pretty good. Because that's the type of return that you're looking for if you're a team like the Wizards, right? And it's a first this year. So that means you're gonna have an extra first. It may not necessarily be that high, but it's still another first. You could play around with it, get another player, do whatever you want with it. So I think that's pretty much a home run, from the perspective for the Wizards, because their initial trades look kind of weird, and not
Horrible.
really much return. But they did get some first back in these other deals. And again, it's just kind of for the Grizzlies. What a bummer because they gave up 2 first round picks to get Marcus Smart, hoping that he would be a big part of their team, and it just hasn't panned out because he hasn't been able to play. So I guess good on them for pivoting and moving on, but it's unfortunate that they couldn't take him and get somebody, I think better, right? Because there were talks about could you possibly get a guy like Jimmy Butler and put Marcus Smart in that deal or things like that, or whatever other type of players were rolling around. But they're basically banking on their young guys, kind of I guess helping them in a playoff setting. We'll see what a guy like Jalen Wells looks like in a playoff series. Vince Williams, can he come back and be healthy? Because when he's played, he's been productive for them on both ends. He just hasn't played at all. And then a guy like Jake LaRavia, they had declined his option, so he would have been, I think, an or maybe restricted, but like he would have been a free agent, and they may not have necessarily been able to bring him back. So I guess they were just like, we'll just move on from him, and he's played actually pretty well for the Grizzlies this year, so maybe he can help the Kings. But for the Wizards, I think they're kind of the big winners mainly in this deal. I like it the most for them because you got a first this year. Again, won't be that high, but it's still a first that you could turn into an extra player to add to the team because this is a rebuild team, obviously.
Yeah, from the Wizards' perspective, I think it's amazing because, yeah, I think the highlight obviously is the first round pick, especially going into the 2025 draft, which is, one of the deeper ones. You've got a lot of talented college players coming into the league next year, so I think that's awesome. You can either, like you said, move it, trade up, or, something like that. But the Marcus Smart thing is cool because I think people are looking at it from the perspective of, is he going to play? Da 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 da, this, da 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 that. I'm really looking at it from a mentorship aspect. I think he could be a solid veteran for a lot of the young guys. If he's able to, tell Zach Edey, use your body, then I think he could tell Alex Sarr those things, or he could give Bub Carrington some point of attack tips, just run of the mill veteran stuff, which I think we were somewhat lacking because of guys like Kyle Kuzma, XYZ. So, and then you bring in Alex Len as well. Cool. You kind of replace what Valanciunas would have, been bringing. So it's not like you lost out on the exactly. And it's like, you're not losing out on the impact of having, multiple big men in the lineup. So, and spoiler alert, Memphis fans, Marvin Bagley and Johnny Davis will not be doing anything for you. Just saying. So, yeah, Wizards definitely won this one.
Right. Yeah. And that's where you kind of wonder, like, what was the point of the Grizzlies doing that? But again, I guess it was just maybe open up open up a roster spot. I guess give away guys. We'll see. But
get away
like
from
you
Marcus
said,
Smart. That's what it was.
Yeah.
They reported it was like flexibility or something like that. But
right? Yeah. It's just tough because it's just tough to kind of basically take a swing on a guy and then miss, right? Because they gave up, like I said, 2 firsts. That was in the Porzingis deal, right? And yeah, that it just didn't work out, unfortunately. So, and that happens sometimes, but that was always kind of the gamble with him is that, he's a guy that has not been able to stay healthy the last few years. And when he's healthy, he can be a productive guy, but it just hasn't really worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then got some other smaller moves, right? Like James Wiseman going to the Raptors basically for cash. He's not going to play. So, I mean, he's, unfortunately, he's got the Achilles injury going on. And we already mentioned, the Wizards' other deal, right, where Reggie Jackson was on the Wizards. He got waived as well. And I guess the Sixers got Jared Butler for future seconds. But the Wizards got back a first, right? Yeah. So I mean a future first. So pretty solid there. And that pretty much wraps up, I would say, the deals, right, for the deadline, right? In terms of we went through all of them. Some teams that ended up not making any real moves. Denver Nuggets didn't really do anything. Minnesota Timberwolves didn't do anything except ask about KD, I guess. The Orlando Magic didn't do anything. Portland Trailblazers didn't do anything, right? So I think, a couple of those teams, they're in the second apron, and they just didn't really have any real... Like, for the Nuggets, the only guy you could realistically move if it wasn't Michael Porter Jr. was like a Zeke Naji, and I just don't think anybody really wanted him. Sure. Nobody really wanted Sarge. Those guys I think are on multi-year contracts, and I just think it was going to be tough for them to really move those guys. And I don't think they were willing to give up Michael Porter Jr. for the guys that were left, right? Because there was a thought maybe they could move him for LaVine. LaVine got moved, right? So that was off the table. Could you put him in a Kevin Durant package? You just don't have the salaries to really put together anything like that. So that's kind of the tough part for the Nuggets, where they're going to stand pat. But I think the hope is that guys will continue to play better. Hopefully some of these guys that are out due to injury, they can come back and they'll help them out. And, maybe they can inch up into the standings because they're right there. They're right there. They have the ability to move into the top three with the way the Rockets have played. So, we'll kind of see what happens there. Some guys that ended up not getting moved, right? Nikola Vucevic. That was the guy on the Bulls that I think we thought he could be moved. Talks about maybe him going to Golden State. Apparently the Bulls asked for too much again. So we'll see what happens there.
Oh god.
But yeah, and for both teams, that's kind of a bummer because he seemed like a guy that could fit well there. And for the Bulls, you don't really need Vucevic anymore at this point, right? But they chose to stand pat. And then after that, some possible buyout guys. Again, the tough part with the buyout market is you just don't historically get a lot of guys that get bought out that make a big difference. And now with the new CBA, they can't just go to any team, right? Like there's talks about Ben Simmons is probably going to get bought out. But there's not a ton of teams that can realistically sign him. But the teams that could sign him, they mentioned the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Clippers. I mean, if he could be, solid, I mean, that's a pretty good addition for both of those teams. I mean, for the Cavs, it's weird, right? Because that would be another big, that you're going to put out there that doesn't really space the floor like that. But he's such a versatile defender. He can kind of play different positions on defense. I'd be curious to see how it looks just from the perspective of, what does it look like for him, on a contending team playing a different role than he was playing, in Brooklyn and Philly. And then the Clippers, if they could get him, they got some decent shooters on that team. So that could be a guy that could play off of some of those guys pretty well. Some of these other guys like Brogdon seems like he's not going to get bought out. Bruce Brown seems like he's not going to get bought out. It's just tough because for these guys that make a certain amount of money, if they get bought out, they're probably going to be minimum contract guys. There are some teams that can offer more than that, but it's just such a huge gamble that you're better off probably just staying in your situation and just playing, and then maybe see if you could get like another mid-level in the offseason as opposed to getting bought out and probably being forced to take minimums from there on out, right? Even like a guy like a Gary Harris benefited from that. He didn't get bought out, and then Orlando gave him another 2-year deal that was more than a minimum. So, that's kind of an argument for why you wouldn't necessarily do that. When we've seen some other guys where the moment they get bought out and became minimum contract guys, they never really got paid much more than that. Even like an Andre Drummond, right, who used to be an all-star at different points. So, what do you think about the Ben Simmons buyout destinations potentially? Because, this was a guy where we knew he wasn't going to get moved. But I honestly didn't really expect him to get potentially bought out either.
Yeah, it's tough, bro.
It hasn't happened yet, to be fair, but it's been discussed.
The fall from grace is nuts, man. But I mean, for him to be, bought out, I really don't know where I like and what I like, to be honest. Because I mean, is he really going to provide you with a whole lot? That's the question.
Right.
I don't know. Run me the options again.
Clippers and Cavs, possibly. Because the thing is, there's not a lot of teams that can get him because he makes so much. And if it's more than the mid-level, he can't really go to a lot of those type of teams. But those are two teams that could potentially grab him because they're under that, apron, I think.
I mean, I guess it wouldn't hurt Cleveland to go and grab him and get, a little bit more deep. But, I don't know. I don't know if I would take that flyer on him because I feel like he's mentally checked out from basketball. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if he can play well, it gives them more defense because the Cavs, that's kind of been their weakness, especially as of late. Their defense just hasn't been as good, and it gives them more size so that way, if one of Mobley or Allen is off the floor, you're not completely tiny again. And I think that's something that could help. It's just a matter of, which one. The Clippers, I mean, again, there's still minutes to be had there. I guess that could be a scenario where you could possibly start, because I don't think he would start for Cleveland. Just because, of the personnel that they have, they're kind of already set. And then I'm assuming Hunter's going to slide into that starting small forward spot. But for the Clippers, I mean, I guess he'd be competing against Derek Jones Jr., who's actually played well. But I could see a scenario where if he pans out, I guess he'd be playing next to Zubac, which could be a problem. But you do have Harden, you do have Norman Powell, and you do have Kawhi as shooters and floor spacers out there. So it could be something that I'd be interested in seeing. But I don't know. It is kind of a gamble, but it is probably for not that much money. So it's like, how much of a gamble really is it? And if it doesn't work, then you probably wouldn't play him.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then like I said, after that, we just don't know enough about the other guys yet. But it seems like a lot of those other guys are going to try to avoid getting bought out, which financially for them is probably the smartest, is probably the smartest thing to do because you don't want to mess around with, possibly losing out on, X amount of money, right? Because that's
Yeah,
just, something that that's not an ideal situation to be in.
right.
Yeah. I mean, and in terms of news rumors, again, we're already done with the trade deadline. So, obviously people have talked about, things that could have been, but we don't really we talked a little bit about it with the Wolves possibly, trading for KD. And we'll see what happens on the buyout market because we know some of these teams are going to be looking for guys. We know the Lakers are going to be looking for guys on the buyout market. Same with Golden State, same with some other teams. And we'll see which guys get bought out and which guys kind of stand pat. But we did get some big news that Chet Holmgren is going to be back on Friday. He's been out since November, basically, right? And the Thunder have been able to get by without him. They're 40-9. They're number one in the Western Conference by a pretty decent margin, right? And so now, they didn't really make any significant moves. They made a trade for Daniel Tice, and then they cut him so that way they could bring up AJ Mitchell to a regular contract, which when he was healthy, because he's been hurt, he's actually played pretty well for them as a rookie. Gives them some size, some physicality, some additional ball handling. They didn't really add anybody at the deadline, but they will add Chet Holmgren, and that's where I'm very curious to see what that looks like when he comes back, and he's healthy. Does Hartenstein start next to him? Do they just kind of have a starting and then back up, maybe play some minutes together? Maybe close depending on the matchup. How does that look with Caruso and all their other defensive guys out there? I'm a little bit disappointed that they didn't add anybody, but they could also look at it from the perspective of we are adding Chet Holmgren, and then we'll just kind of go from there. Because I do kind of worry somewhat about the offense in the second unit. But either way, some of that could just be patched up by Chet Holmgren if he comes back and he's healthy and looks like how he looked before he got hurt. That's a huge addition, right? Because before he was hurt, he was playing, kind of at a borderline all-star level.
Yeah, it's tough. I think, the read on OKC is rough because I feel like they're at the point where, they're 40-9. They probably felt like they didn't need to shake anything up. Granted, I think there's always room for improvement. I don't care. There's no team that can't or couldn't improve. You know what I mean? So from that perspective, I don't like kind of just standing pat, but Chet coming back is going to be amazing. It's going to do wonders for that team, I think, on both ends of the floor.
Right. So I guess all in all, if we want to kind of wrap this up, winners, losers, what do we think?
Winners outright, I think you have to pick the Lakers, obviously. Acquiring Luka and then obviously getting, Mark Williams for I think a pretty fair price. Definitely deserves a win for me. I guess maybe the Wizards because you did kind of get multiple first round picks and you also sold on multiple guys that we expected to be gone, and I think that's good, that they kind of stuck to the script. I think they could have gotten rid of other guys, but regardless, I think it was still a decent haul.
I think you can add the Cavs there too.
Yeah, I would put the Cavs and maybe the Heat. I think I would put Cavs and Heat.
Okay.
Yeah, because we already talked about it. DeAndre Hunter definitely makes that team much more dangerous. And then Miami, get rid of the Jimmy Butler saga, and you get a player with similar production.
Yeah, the Spurs, I think you could add them there too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I forgot about that. And shout out to Fox. His debut was pretty solid.
Yeah, exactly. And he was kind of able to make some big plays late in the game where you can kind of see that where he can help. I was surprised he and Chris Paul started together, but yeah, it worked.
Yeah, it happened.
Yeah. So now losers, what do we think there? And again, some of this, to be fair, maybe a little bit too early, but I think some of it you could put the Suns maybe in there just because they just didn't do enough. Right. I think it's fair to put them in that situation. The Magic, they didn't really do anything. I guess maybe their thought process is wait until these guys get healthy.
Yes.
And then we'll kind of see from there. So, I mean, they weren't necessarily I don't think they felt compelled like they had to do stuff. It's just they have been struggling recently. And that's where you kind of worry, how far could they continue to fall? Because their offense has been very problematic, even with Paolo and Franz back. Most of these other teams, I mean, what else? What other teams do you think you would add in there?
Bulls, I think, would be a loser for me.
Hmm.
Awkward, very awkward. Like,
Awkward loser, yeah.
yeah, I liked some of the things, but I think the negatives outweigh the positives. So for that
Right.
reason, I think they're a loser. I think
Hmm.
Memphis is a loser as well. Like you said, kind of stings to have to move on from a guy that put a lot of effort into acquiring, and then you
Hmm.
got back pretty much absolutely nothing.
Right.
Phoenix is definitely in that. I'm gonna have to go with Dallas too. I think
Okay.
I'm still not over the Luca AD trade, and I just think it's gonna be one that's gonna haunt the Mavs and their fans, and that
Hmm.
entire franchise for the next 10 years. If I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, we haven't seen either Luca or AD play yet for their new teams, right? Obviously the Mavs have played two games post Luca trade, right? They
Mhm.
lost the first one, then they won the second one, and then for the Lakers, I think they've played one
One,
game since
one,
the Luka
yeah,
trade because they played the Clippers, right, where
yeah,
and they're currently playing the Warriors as we speak,
yeah,
right? Warriors are shorthanded, because they obviously made the Butler deal. But either way, and that's kind of the weird part of games like around the deadline where we've seen it in the past where teams will just have a bunch of guys out. The Warriors one was funny because they had guys that were coming out onto the court, and then they told them you had to go back in because you're about to get moved, right? And like an hour before the game, I think Steve Kerr was like, you know, saying a bunch of stuff that doesn't really make a lot of sense where it's like well we don't want to have to do these type of things because we don't want to risk some stuff, but we also want to win, and we also need to make sure we're and again, there's only but so much he can really say because
sure,
this was before that trade was official, right? So it's not like he can say, yeah, we need to go get we need to go get some of these bozos out of here and go get Jimmy
yep,
Butler or Kevin
yep,
Durant. Like, he's not going to say that, right?
right,
He's a nice guy.
yeah,
So just kind of funny how that realistically goes. But I'm very excited to see some of these new look teams because, again, some of these teams like the Lakers and the Mavs, they look very different from what they were before, the deadline. And some of these other teams, like the Spurs, obviously they added Fox. So some of these teams added on to what they already had, which I think is really cool. But yeah, so in terms of winners, losers, those are kind of at least for now, teams that we look at. Because there's other teams that by not doing anything, it's disappointing, but they didn't necessarily have to do anything. Like for the Rockets, you didn't have to make a major move,
no,
right? Because you're already winning just from the perspective of you're in the playoffs. Now, unfortunately, they've gone on a bit of a losing streak. So they're probably going to drop to that 4 spot. And, depending on what happens with, a team like LA, could they drop to 5? Who knows? But
Houston is
either
annoying, bro, because they lose against like the most mediocre or garbage teams, but they beat all the best ones. They're the weirdest team. They're the weirdest
right.
three seed I've ever seen in my life, but it is what
Yeah,
it
and
is.
like I said, that's the tough part because some of the games, like I mentioned, that they lost were games that they had no business losing. You had no business losing the Brooklyn Nets one. You just win that one game, and you're still a game ahead of the Denver Nuggets. They
Right.
do have the tiebreaker against the Nuggets, if I'm not mistaken, but still, it's a tough one. But AD, it sounds like he's gonna come back. I believe it's Saturday, right? Against which
Yeah.
team is it? The it which team is it that they play?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think, but I'm pretty sure he comes back. I think I want to say it's Saturday against. Is it the Rockets? Maybe. No, it's
Um.
Yeah, it is the Rockets. It's Saturday against the Rockets,
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
I believe
February
Luca.
8th.
Yeah, and then Luca, he was supposed to come back, or reportedly maybe going to come back on Saturday against the Pacers, but now it sounds like he's going to play Monday against the Jazz. Doesn't really matter which one, obviously, but either way, again, a crazy trade deadline, one for the ages. I think, to wrap it up, is this the craziest trade deadline we've ever seen?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Maybe across all sports because of the weight that Luca and AD trade carries, but even outside of that, we got some pretty big names, go on the
Yeah.
move like Jimmy, De'Aaron Fox. I think the Fox one has really been swept under the rug.
Yeah.
Um but that one's really elite considering, the
Mhm.
package that San Antonio had to give up, which was practically a bag of chips. But
Yeah.
um I'm trying to think of what else was good. Um I mean, like the Brandon Ingram one from a name standpoint is pretty solid in terms of, the caliber of player, not necessarily the returns or the destination, but definitely caliber. So, yeah,
Yeah.
pretty active in terms of some big names. So,
Yeah.
I think it's definitely the biggest one.
And then what's your favorite trade if you have one?
My favorite
Just
trade.
on paper.
Probably the Fox to Spurs, man. I think I really like that one. I know, everybody's
Yeah,
raving and, wanting to see Luca in action, but, I think
right.
the fact that we've already
Yeah, throwing
seen
that one out the window because that one's kind of unfair to compare it to. So
exactly. So yeah, I would say the Fox one. Like I said, just
yeah,
because of that package
I agree.
and the fit. Like you can automatically tell there's a difference within that system because I think, you know, it was all, feed Wemby and we need to get ours. But now, you've got that second option, arguably even first at times.
Right.
It
Yeah, because
seems
of the
like
perimeter play.
yeah, and the way the guy can break down a defense, it makes you really think, you know, um how the
Mhm.
Spurs even got to this point. So shout out to the
Yeah.
Spurs for making not necessarily a generational move, but definitely my favorite move from this
Yeah, it
deadline.
it it definitely helps move the franchise forward for
Yeah,
sure because you
heck
got
yeah,
a guy that's really good for very little,
yeah.
essentially.
And the guy he can do everything at all three levels. It's nuts.
Yeah. And then last but not least favorite trade. Do you have one?
Hmm. Least favorite trade. Um. Um.
I think Levine going to the Kings is just kind of a weird one.
It is weird.
I don't know if I would necessarily say it's my least favorite.
Hmm.
Um, the Kuzma one is kind of weird too.
I would
Like,
say
I mean, I
Brandon Ingram for me. Weird.
I think that's the one where I just don't really understand it. I think is probably why
Yeah,
that
I
one's
would never
probably.
do that trade.
But I at least understand. But like I said, from the Raptors' perspective, it's just hard to say no because he's good, and it's like you didn't really have to give up much. It's just I guess kind of looking back, if you look back a year ago as the New Orleans Pelicans, and they went to a time machine and they said you're gonna trade Brandon Ingram for Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk. Do you like that if you're New Orleans? I mean, like if this team is healthy, like you got to stretch big. You got Bruce Brown, who's nice, but is that really what you would have hoped to get? If this was pre CBA, I think he could have probably gotten more. But also, you have to factor in Ingram's an expiring contract, so you weren't going to get a whole lot for a
Right.
guy, anyways. Because it was always the gamble that he could leave. Although there's not very many teams with cap space anyway, so who's ever trading for him, you're assuming is going to re-sign him. I just think from a Raptors perspective, it's a lot of money paid to a lot of guys that I'm not sure necessarily can get you to a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah.
That would be my main question about it because most of the teams that are in the playoff hunt right now, I don't really see a real reason for why they would fall out of it, because
Sure.
I mean, if Atlanta was healthy, they could be a playoff team, right? So I think like 1 through 9 fully healthy, those could all challenge for a playoff spot. Even Philly, if they were healthy, they'd be in the playoffs too. You always have at least one or two teams that can't challenge, but for the Raptors, I guess, you get that. Maybe we'll see if they challenge for the play-in because the Sixers, they've been struggling, but I think if they can just not get too injured the rest of the way, they could probably take the Bulls spot, I think.
Yeah.
And then it's
Definitely
just a
now that
matter of
Levine is gone.
right, and then the Hawks, they're 1-9 in their last 10. Jalen Johnson is gone. So could they unfortunately fall out? Maybe, but
Yes.
for the Raptors, you're going to have to do a lot of winning, I think, to get into
That's why I
that
don't agree
spot.
with it. I don't agree with it.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, what a wild trade deadline. It was a lot, to take in, a lot to digest, and a lot to absorb in a very short amount of time. Again, I tried doing that over a 3-hour stretch for that live stream. And again, you can check it out if you want, to
Please
react to
do.
trades in real time. And then obviously also, again, continue to like, comment, and subscribe on our videos. If you leave a comment, we'll read it towards the end. And then obviously, if you like and subscribe, it will help the channel grow because we have been getting some more subscribers recently. So that's great to see. Great to see the channel grow. And we'll see you in the next video.